Well, hello everyone. I'm Timothy, host of 90 and Out, and in this series we are looking at the words in red, Jesus Speaks. Anytime we look at Scripture, the Christian Bible, we want to read the text, bring out historical culture and context, give some life application for today. Why are we looking at this text? And then, fourth, preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. All of Scripture points to Jesus of Nazareth. And in this series, we're going to be looking at what words are credited to him by the four biographers. So, without further ado, let's get to the words in red, because Jesus speaks. So, for this particular video, we are going to be looking at an account by the Gospel according to Luke. It's found in chapter 4. We're going to start in the 16th verse. I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version. Feel free and read from any translation you like. The best translation is the one you read. So, Gospel according to Luke, he records, starting in the 16th verse. So he came to Nazareth, where he was brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recover of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." Then he closed the book and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all those who were in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So all bore witness to him and marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" And he said to them, "You will surely say this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself. Whatever we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in your country.' Then he said, 'Assuredly, I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout all the land. But to none of them was Elijah sent, except to Zarephath, in the region of Sidon, to the woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleaned except Naaman the Syrian." So all those in the synagogue, when they had heard these things, were filled with wrath, and rose up and thrust him out of the city. And they led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff. Then passing through the midst of them, he went his way. Bless the reading of your word. What in the world is going on here? What in the world is going on here? He picks up a scroll. He doesn't pick it up. It's given to him by an attendant. Well, first thing is, let's look at some first century Judean and Galilean customs in synagogues. It was customary for everyone to stand for the reading of Scripture, what we call the Old Testament, or the Tanakh. Almost all synagogues would have a copy of the Torah, the first 5 books, but then the prophets and the writings, they'd get passed around, and usually prominent families would have specific days of the year they would read from a specific prophet or the poetry. So undoubtedly, it says this was as his custom. This was most likely Joseph's family's time, and since Jesus was a rabbi at this point, he would be the one to read. Now, he reads from Isaiah 61. So if we flip over to Isaiah 61, we can read this text, and I find it pretty fascinating that he stops short of a very particular statement. Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Now Jesus stops there and shuts the scroll. He closes it and hands it back. If we just keep reading the very next, it's not even a full sentence, it's the second half of that sentence. The day of vengeance of our God. Fascinating. Just let that sink in for a little bit. Why would Jesus stop right there? I don't know. But what we do know is that then he sits down. So, hold that thought. I don't know if you can hear it in the video feed, but there is a semi-truck next door just revving their throttle. And it's kind of loud. But let's continue anyway. Alright, so Jesus sits down. Now there's 2 places he could have sat. He could have sat on a cushion where the speaking rabbi would sit to teach. This was common. Happened every Saturday. The congregation would be standing, and then the rabbi would sit down to actually teach. In some churches, especially Catholics, they would call this the homily. Pentecostals, some Baptists call it a sermon. So Jesus could have been sitting to do that. The other place that he could have been sitting is known as the throne, or the throne chair. And that was an empty seat set up like a throne, and it was for the coming Messiah. Most synagogues would have this chair, and no one was allowed to sit in it because it was specifically designated for their coming Messiah to sit in. It was symbolic. Now, if Jesus would have sat in that chair, he would have been stating emphatically that he was their Messiah. But either way, we do know that he says, today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Now, Isaiah 61 is a messianic prophecy. It was known as a messianic prophecy at the time and still is today. So even if Jesus is sitting on the cushion reserved for the teaching rabbi, he makes his words clear here. He is proclaiming that he is the coming Messiah. They are marveled, they're in awe, but he doesn't stop. So a lot of times I'll see this section, this passage, just broke down right there and stopped. But he doesn't. He says, you will surely say this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself. Where whatever we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in your own country. Now that's interesting because if you read chapter 3, Jesus is in the wilderness. He's not really doing anything. And then the beginning of chapter 4, the beginning of chapter 4, he's in the wilderness being tempted by the devil. There's not really anything going on here. But Luke does say that Jesus returned from there and to Galilee, and the news of him went out throughout the surrounding region. Well, Capernaum is the capital of Galilee. Now, if we look at the other biographies, Mark, John, and Matthew, they do say that Jesus was teaching in Capernaum during this time, but Luke doesn't cover that. Some people call this an undesigned coincidence, where Luke just kind of brushes it off as the entire region of Galilee. He was becoming a known person, but Matthew and John say, hey, he wasn't just in Galilee. He was specifically in Capernaum on the shore doing some pretty crazy stuff and talking about some pretty cool stuff. So some theologians think that during that time is the Sermon on the Mount. I honestly don't know. But what I do know is there was a large crowd in this small town to hear him speak, and they're not happy with what he says. So let's look at that real quick. Assuredly, I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his own country, but I tell you, truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah. Now, if you go back in the Old Testament, you can read about Elijah. And Elijah cursed Israel with, and said there would be no rain for 3.5 years, and there wasn't. And then one day he goes out and he prays and goes, look, there's a cloud, and the famine ends and the drought ends. But during that time, he goes to Sidon, who were enemies of Israel, and ministers to her, who is a widow. Believe, if memory serves me correct, that this widow had jars for water, but it ended up being a never-ending jug of oil, which is a fascinating story. So maybe I'll put that either in the pinned comment or in the description where that's found, who Jesus is referencing here. But he also talks about the lepers, and Naaman the Syrian is a fairly well-known passage where Elisha goes to Naaman goes to Elisha to be healed of leprosy. He is a commander in the Syrian army, and they were at war with Israel. And Elisha tells Naaman, go dip 7 times in the Jordan River, which was a dirty river. And Naaman's like, no, it's a dirty river. Aren't there better rivers in Syria where I'm from? And one of his servants says, well, he's the prophet of God. Maybe you should listen to him. And he does, and he's healed. But Jesus is pointing out that these prophets didn't do a lot of miracles or really a lot of assistance to fellow Jews, fellow Israelites. And because they didn't honor the prophets. Matter of fact, Elijah, he runs for his life because the king and queen want him dead. Yeah, so fascinating. And what happens? Well, similar to what happens to the people Jesus is referring to here. They try to throw him out of a cliff. They try to chase him out of town. They take him to the hill cliffside and try to throw him off to kill him, and he just goes his way. It says Luke records that he just went past him and like another day. So I find it very difficult to detach Jesus of Nazareth from being a Jew because he's very steeped in Judaism, obviously. He is the Jewish Messiah. So let me know your thoughts, and let's keep this conversation going. I personally find this particular section in Luke fascinating because in a pretty short span, Jesus reads from Isaiah, references a psalm. I believe the physician, heal yourself, is a psalm. It might be from one of the minor prophets. I'll double check on that and put it in the comments and in the description. The prophet is not accepted in his own country. is also recorded by John in chapter 4. And then he references Elijah and Elisha. Elijah and Elisha were well known to the Israelite people at this time, and they were hailed as big pillars of the faith and great prophets. Yet their contemporaries at the time actively tried to kill them. And guess what we're going to find? Spoiler alert, these same people are going to actively try to kill Jesus. They are blinded by their own traditions and expectations that they can't see the Messiah who is literally sitting in front of them. Also, I find it fascinating that he is sitting during this time until they rush him and haul him out of town. How defensible is the sitting position? Like, it would be very difficult for me to defend myself if somebody came in right now and tried to attack me. I would need to get up, but we don't see any of that here. So ask yourself, is Jesus the Messiah? Because to reference C.S. Lewis, he wasn't the first one to say it, but he was the one who was pinned with the statement, liar, lunatic, Lord, known as the trilemma. Either he's a liar, meaning what he's saying he knows is untrue, but saying it anyway, or he's a lunatic, he believes he's their Messiah, this coming king, and he's crazy, or he's exactly who he claims to be. He is the coming Messiah. He is the Jewish Messiah and the hope for all the nations. As if you continue to read in Isaiah 61, you'll see that through this coming Messiah, all nations are blessed. All nations. But there is vengeance coming too. And I'm sure Jesus will probably talk about the day of vengeance too later on. But here he stops with just the proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. If you're good news to the poor, that's what gospel means, good news. If you're brokenhearted, if you're a captive, if you're blind, if you're oppressed, Jesus is the Messiah. He's saying he came to fulfill all of that. So ask yourself today, while you're watching this, while you're reading this, is he your Messiah? Is he your Messiah? Because the Messiah wasn't just for the Jews. At the time in first century Judea and Galilee, they were exclusionary. They thought the Messiah was just for them. But if you read the Old Testament, it's pretty clear that all nations will be blessed by the Messiah. All nations. And I'm so glad the Messiah is available and for all nations and people. Because I'm not Jewish. Hey, if you're still watching this or listening to this video covering the words in red, Jesus speaks, I'll ask if I've earned that right, if I've earned that privilege, that reward, if you will, for a like, share, subscribe, all the social media stuff. Go ahead and do that. I would appreciate it. Also, the comment sections are always open. Keep it peaceful. Keep it preferably lightheaded. We can get a little heated, but be respectful. And I'd love to hear from you. So share. Also, I should point this out. If you don't like this content, hit the thumbs down button on YouTube. All the social media pages, they have a dislike-ish type button to push. So if you don't like this content, go ahead and do that. The only thing I ask is that you tell me why. What don't you like about this content? And if I can, because that's going to help me make better content for you. So with that, I'm Timothy Holt, and this is 90, and we're out.